I'm going to say we are live now. And thank you, Lilit, for helping us. And my apologies to everyone for the delay. We are so happy to have you here. And we're all learning. So here we are. Until you try, you don't know. But thank you. My name is Rachel Najarian, and I'm the Executive Director of the Armenian International Women's Association. And we are very pleased to be able to provide this virtual panel today to help provide insight to our audiences into what leaders in education are grappling with in real time, and also some of the solutions that they're seeing on the horizon and opportunities for what I think will be a very different future, certainly in the short term, but even inevitably in the long term for education. And we are very lucky to have our panelists here today from all aspects and ages education. Before I go into introductions and then sign off, I wanted to just say that you can put your questions and comments into Facebook, and we will do our best to answer them. And our panelists are prepared to talk pretty much just about an hour, as we've said, but also stay tuned on our website after this event for further information. We are recording the discussion, and we plan to make that available, and other information that comes from this discussion, and potentially more panels and more discussions around this topic, responding to some of the questions that come forward. And that is aiwainternational.org, AIWA international.org. So before further ado, and as I pass it over to our moderator, I want to introduce our esteemed panelist, Mary Papazian, Dr. Papazian, who is the president of San Jose State University, which is, I did not realize, was Silicon Valley's only public university. It's pretty amazing. And she comes to San Jose State from many years of leadership in education, having been the president of Southern Connecticut State University in Connecticut, as well as the provost and senior vice president at Lehman College of the City University of New York. So many of you know Mary. Those who don't, she is a wonderful friend to many and to AWA, and thanks for being here. Ane Shabazian is originally Southern California born and bred, and she has several degrees in psychology, human development, urban schooling education from Harvard and UCLA. And she served as a faculty member in the developmental psychology department at UCLA, while also being the executive director of their infant development program. She is now a tenured professor at Loyola Marymount University, as well as the director of the LMU's Children's Center. So very broad backgrounds there, complemented by our moderator, Savannah Panosian, who is an AP English literature teacher at El Camino High School, and that's San Bruno, I believe,
South
right?
San Francisco.
South San Francisco, that's right. And she is also a award-winning teacher and a master teacher. So she teaches teachers in writing, and is a graduate of the writing program at SFSU, San Francisco State University's writing program. So we have early learning, we've got high school, we've got college, and I have a feeling you're all going to learn a tremendous amount from all of them. And we look forward to hearing this discussion. Thank you so much for being here, and I'm going to sign off and take it away, Savannah.
Thank you, Rachel. So thank you, everyone. We educators are faced with an unprecedented time in education, whether we're talking about early education, child development, K through 12, and higher education. We've been receiving a lot of questions from parents and teachers alike, and we're going to try to address some of the issues in this very interesting window and glimpse into 21st century learning and what we're going to be seeing in the new form of education that is going to be, we're catapulted into. That said, we have a beautiful symbiotic relationship in education between early education, K through 12, and higher education. And I think the first question I'm going to pose is, you know, how do these unprecedented times create challenges and, more importantly, opportunities for all three of these levels? And how can all three institutions change to allow for online learning in 21st century learning skills? So maybe we'll start with Dr. Papazian and then work to early education and then go back up the triangle.
Well, great. And thank you all for your patience in our getting launched here online. Now you know something about what our students go through. So we should be empathetic to each of them. But I want to say that we do live in a digital world. We have seen the fourth digital transformation, and all of these students, whether they're starting in early childhood right now, or they're at our universities and looking to graduate this year, next year, or a few years out, they will be graduating into an economy and a world that already was being transformed by digitization. And many of you have heard the fears of automation, of artificial intelligence, how many jobs were going to be lost. It will take our students adaptability with an online environment, as well as the development of their creativity, that combination of skills and experiences and knowledge to thrive in the economy of the future, not perhaps the economy that many of us grew up in. And so we're trying to look at this as first to support students in the immediate challenge of a very sudden change. And we can talk about that in a little while, but also to set them up as part of this process for success long-term. And, you know, every challenge is a crisis first, and then it becomes an opportunity as we find ways and we begin to understand more deeply what the period will be like, what the transformational trajectory might be, and how we want to emerge on the other side. So while you might be despairing, you know, from time to time because it's been such a disruption, the trends were there. We just sometimes pretended not to see them, and now we have no choice. And so we want to support our young people or our older people who might be adult learners coming back to school, and help them continue to be positive and engaged and start to see differently about the way their learning can set them up for future success.
Absolutely. Dr. Shabazian, what's your take as an early education specialist? I'm hearing friends of mine who have preschoolers at home, and preschools having online Zoom lessons for, you know, 3-4-year-olds. What are some of the challenges? What are some of the opportunities in that kind of a learning environment, and the idea of having a flipped classroom from such an early developmental age? What do you think about that? What's your take on that?
Well, I think that's very true. We're having to relearn a lot of what we've taught educators now for several years, early childhood educators in particular, about the detrimental effects of screen time and how to kids, you know, the American Academy of Pediatrics has really strict regulations around screen time and how much screen time, et cetera, for kids under the age of 5, an hour a day, et cetera, for 2 to 5, and even less, none for young children, really young infants, unless they're video chatting. So we're having to relearn that. We're going from very much of a play-based, hands-on, using all of your senses, to we're looking at the screen now in a lot of these places. This is the option that we have. And yet, we're seeing it, my program over at LMU has launched a terrific online instructional program, and it's been a huge hit. And we have principals and educators from all over the world, all over the nation, I should say, sitting in on it to get some sense of how do you engage a toddler over screen. And we have about an hour-and-a-half sessions daily with each of our classrooms. And in the afternoon, we have more of a free flow style of instruction. But again, it's synchronous. I think that's the big difference. It's synchronous. It's video chatting. It's doing a circle time with your teacher that you know who's engaging the children on the screen.
Mm-hmm.
It's very different than watching a Powerpuff video that's potentially, that has frenetic action constantly. It's, not all screen time is created the same. So I think we're learning that, and we're learning how to engage the children in a synchronous manner that's very effective for them. While they're still absorbed in organic play at home and spending time with their family.
It's like my daughter's school at KZV Armenian School in San Francisco. The preschool uniform actually has printed on the back, "Menk Chagalov Gesorvink."
Yeah.
The idea of play and creativity being integrated through this new platform is something I think that is obviously going to build some challenges, but is also again, a really great predictor of how 21st century professional skills, career and technical skills are going to be integrated. And so I think that's interesting to hear from the perspective of early education. What's your take on that, Dr. Papazian?
Yeah, it's I'm not an early educator, so I'm going to step in for a moment into Ani's expertise. So, so forgive me for that. But one of the things we do know is that the new economy, as I said earlier, is going to be dependent on creativity. Mm-hmm. And my colleague Joseph Ayoun from Northeastern University has written a book called Robot Proof. And, the element that goes in there is really the element of creativity. When you talk to employers, not just here in Silicon Valley, but really all across the country, about what they're looking for. They're looking for the ability to work collaboratively, the ability to be creative, the ability to synthesize information, to communicate. Mm-hmm. All of that isn't done through book learning. That's done through the development of critical thinking skills and experiences intersecting with the digital environment. And so, I've read anecdotally about many who say that our young people are too scripted. Another colleague at NYU has written a book called The Coddling of the American Mind, how we protect our kids, we don't let them fall and scrape their knees anymore, we don't have free play outside anymore. And there are all kinds of reasons why that developed over time, but it wasn't like that when I was a child. Who have been here long enough can remember those days. And so there's something to be said about recognizing the challenge of working parents at home, trying to manage that while handling young people, elementary school ages, even middle school ages, intersecting with kids. There's a lot of stress in that part. But on the other side, we can't be as regimented and as strict in this environment. Absolutely. It is a little bit of a throwback to more open play and kids negotiating with each other if they have siblings, for example, and finding solutions, working out who uses the computer when. Is it, and so there's a lot that goes on into the skill building that actually sets people up for success in the current and future work environment. Right. So I would just say to all the parents out there who are who are managing a very, very sudden and challenging transformation here. And I feel your pain on this one, that stick with it and don't worry. It's not going to be perfect, but they are learning resilience. They are learning adaptability. They are learning that all the plans you make sometimes get upended. Yes. And they are learning that in part from you as parents, and as teachers, and how do we face it? Can we live in some ambiguity? Can we not always have all the answers? And, it's very healthy not always to have the answers. Yes. And to say, I'm not sure how this is going. We're working it out together and we're going to get some things right. And honestly, we're going to get some things wrong. Yes. And, they say in sort of the startup culture that if you're right 10% of the time, right, you're a great success. We're all going to fail, and that's okay. And so there are a lot of lessons in this. We can't imagine we're going to meet all the same benchmarks in the same way that we might have expected before this COVID pandemic, hit all of us. But that doesn't mean there isn't learning going on and that learning isn't valuable. Absolutely. And, the kids will be all right. Yes. They will. The college students will be all right. the ones who come to us as freshmen will be all right, because every one of these environments will have learning that will benefit them. And I am really interested many years out when the researchers look and see how this generation has learned those skills of adaptability, resilience, and creativity. I suspect we're going to be surprised, and often in a positive way.
Absolutely. Excellent. You know, as a K through 12 educator, I get this question about, you know, what is learning? And, you know, if we get a bunch of teachers going into a discussion on this, you know, the research shows learning is a process that's active. You know, whether you're looking at Piaget and Vygotsky's, you know, theory, it builds on prior knowledge. It occurs in a complex social environment. And I think that's where a lot of the issues and questions and insecurity is coming from. What defines a learning environment? There's cognitive engagement, there's, you know, authenticity. And, you know, in a learning, the issue that's coming up a lot in these discussions is what is the difference between a learning environment and a learning community? Now, something that for a K through 12 educator, for myself, I deal generally with 10th through 12th grade students. And I'd like to say on a side note, I think this issue is affecting teenagers probably at a more stressful level than any other group possibly, because of their social importance and social engagement. But in a learning community, you know, students communicate with both the instructor and their peers, and it gives a sense of belonging and social learning opportunities. And you know, the most effective are probably asynchronous lessons, which integrate individualized projects and give students a sense of control in a very insecure environment right now. I know a lot of teachers are asking me, well, what's the way to do this on Zoom? Should I be doing synchronous teaching? Not necessarily, because, you know, you have kids sitting in classroom, their classroom is their home. And I can give you a perfect example. And this really affects, I think the one negative effect is on perhaps low income learners and also special education, special needs students. After I did my lesson on, I think it was on narrative pacing for AP Lit, I switched my screen and saw one of my students feeding a child with a bottle and another one, you know, holding their 4-year-old, you know, toddler sibling on their lap. So I think that some of those questions are coming up. However, I think the physical, social, cultural, and psychological factors of a learning environment have an effect on learning, and consequently, it's hard for learning to occur without an environment that's conducive to learning. So I think in order to kind of minimize some of the stress with some of these parents, as long as we are, you are as parents, trying to create an environment that's conducive to learning, I think it should kind of alleviate some of the pressures. This is, again, an unprecedented time. Now, that said, I have another question here for Dr. Papazian. So K through 12 schools are finding that students in blended and flipped classrooms are having an easier time in this process. And for those parents who don't understand what a blended or flipped classroom is, a blended classroom would be similar to a school that's a brick and mortar school that also uses and integrates online platforms like Google Classroom, Turnitin.com, Google Hangout, Zoom, etc. So it kind of is a blended classroom. So back to the question, in blended and flipped classrooms, they're having an easier time in the process than students who come from more traditional brick and mortar schools. That said, how do we factor this into future students who are entering universities in not only fall 2020, but in fall 2021? What do we expect? And how do we learn to live in this uncertainty while also seeing the advent of 21st century learning and beyond?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I would say this, that we need to make a distinction between the experience students are having right now, this spring, versus the experience that we anticipate they will be having going forward. And what I mean by that is this, that many of the classes, it's a different design structure of the class, instructional design, when you create a flipped or blended class, or even a fully online or asynchronous class, than it is when you have a bricks and mortar all face-to-face class. So, you know, students and faculty didn't go into this semester planning to have to flip it halfway through suddenly. So these were not courses, for the most part, that were designed for that different delivery model. So, you know, kudos to every teacher out there, kudos to every faculty member, and to every student who just has been trying to figure it out. This is about the hardest situation you're ever going to be in, because none of it was expected. There was also all the uncertainty around the pandemic itself and everything else. I mean, if we can design how we can create a lot of stress for people, I think we just saw that happen. So, so that's that situation that we're in right now. But, you know, we're starting to see what it looks like now. We're starting to understand a little bit more about the pandemic itself. We're starting to see, slowly but surely, more testing. We will start to understand how thermometers work on this, right? How we track people, and how we can slowly reopen the economy and reopen our institutions. So we know we're going to settle into something of a very long runway to reopening, and it's a long runway that is almost the new normal, if you will. Not the permanent normal, but the new normal for the foreseeable future, because that's going to take some time. And so now, as we think forward to the spring, and we just announced to our faculty today and to our students that we will be planning for primarily online in the fall, with the hope that if the public health guidance allows us, we'll be able to step back from that and create more and more, you know, face-to-face physical courses. But we can plan now, and that's the difference. So now students and teachers and faculty and parents will have a much better understanding of what it's going to look like. My view is that we have to be transparent with folks, that we all understand what the worst case scenario is, which means we can't even show up on our campuses or in our schools. Right. I actually don't think that's going to happen. I think we will be there for part of it. And I think it's a question. I don't personally like the term social distancing. I like the term physical distancing and social connection, because I think more than ever, we do need social connection. And there are many ways still to get that. So now the classes are designed that way. For a long time, we've been doing blended learning on campus, on college campuses. There's a lot that goes on electronically. That we have taken the, you know, the Sage on the stage model is really gone away for the most part. And now we have the student learning in front. And part of the reason for that is, if you think about your access to just facts and background and information on Google, for example, right? We have to teach students not all those facts, because they can look it all up. They'll just pull out their phone. How many of us have done that? We want to know something we can't remember. We can't remember that date. Right. We don't remember it all anymore. We pull out the phone and we look it up. But what we do need to know how to do, what we do need to educate students in, is how to discern, you know, what is authentic and valid and you know, data driven. What are you know, sources that they should trust versus sources that are propaganda, for example. And we know there's a lot of that out there too. So learning how to discern, how to ask critical questions, and that is done by putting the problem at the center of the learning, and then having the students come together to try to solve the problem, and then reach out through various disciplinary models, whether it's a sociological model, you know, a historical model, a scientific model, whatever it might be, or all of those together to address the same problem, which is probably where we need to be. And then as they need to learn more of the actual facts, they look it up, because now they have a reason to know. And when they have a reason to know, they're engaged and they remember a great deal more. So our goal is to give them the frame, and that's where a lot of the in-person things can do it. That creates that connection, and it sets them up for the problem, and then you give it to them and they will learn. It's amazing what this generation of students, of learners, can do. They are pretty remarkable, and it starts from the young age, again, when the play is at the center. Yes. And it's built really all the way through. Students, last comment, I'm going to turn it over because there's a lot the others of you have to say too, but the other thing is this: some students learn better in a face-to-face environment. a face-to-face environment is really helpful and strong for those who are school ready, who like to sit, and who are extroverts. But if your young person is more of an introvert, likes to reflect before speaking, they generally find more avenues to engage when there's an online environment. And so the combination is actually really fantastic. We will do some of that this fall, but it will be a continuum, again, entirely depending on what public health guidelines are. But the difference between now and what will happen in the future is we will have thought and planned and prepared for a healthy and strong learning environment for every young person who comes to our campus. So come to school, don't stop out.
Right.
You're gonna do a lot, you're gonna gain a lot, you're gonna be well positioned, and we will take care of you. Savannah, I'll leave it there.
Oh, that was great, Dr. Papazian. Now, a question kind of to segue to Ani. I liked our discussion a few days ago about this idea of the balancing of, you know, the new form of quantity time rather than the kind of quality time. And what's interesting is I see this with the generation of kids I'm teaching right now. These are the product of super kid syndrome. These are the product of parents who are reading books like, you know, Battle Hymn of the Tiger Mother, and, you know, this kind of, you know, this idea, you know, they're the kids that were watching cartoons. You know, we watched the Flintstones. They're watching, you know, little Einsteins and, you know, these kind of pseudo intellectual kind of cartoons. What do you see are some of the, first of all, some of the more important factors for dealing with preschoolers during this shelter in place? And what would be, in your opinion, I think this is a question that comes up, a kind of a daily routine schedule that works for kids in that developmental age with this idea of Zoom and, you know, all that? I'm going to give it to Ani.
Well, I think you, Savannah, such a key point, and something that I completely espouse is the idea of quantity time.
Yeah.
I remember once reading, quality time is an accident that happens when spending quantity time with someone.
Nice. Yes.
Significant conversations typically don't happen on command. They happen in the midst of quantity time. Those quality moments often come when you're spending time, when moments are plentiful. So quantity is a must for quality time. And I often say the best thing to spend on your children is time.
Yes.
And neuroscience tells us this experience, the early years are truly, it's the crescendo of brain development, right? This is when you're experiencing, the baby at birth the brain weighs 1 pound. 2 years later, it's tripled in size.
Yeah.
So at 3, you have 85% of the wiring set for the remainder of your life. At 5, 90%. So you've got the trajectory set for the rest of your life based on what happens in the early years. So I often say, you know, if we change the beginning of the story, we change the whole story. And I think that's a really interesting, and why the 3 of us coming together here today is also very important, because I think that's a huge part of framing what we're doing now in today's climate. Yeah. And I think, as always, you know, while it's not so much the quantity or the quality, but reframing it in a way that you think of it as, what does my child need to preserve an emotional connection with me?
Yes.
You know, obviously, research is conclusive without a single doubt that without attachment-rich experiences, the brain will not optimally develop.
Yes.
Nurturing emotional relationships is the primary foundation for both intellectual and social growth. The most important learning in early years is pretty much provided by human interaction. Objects and learning devices do not compare, don't come close. So, and we are going to see a difference, right? A child closer to non-human things as devices will have quite differently wired neurons compared to a child in consistent proximity to a human touch, to human feel, et cetera. Yes. Which is why I think we were all talking about sort of the importance of social connection. I think Dr. Papazian said this, the importance of, while we are in this state, to allow your kids, and this is definitely not the time to be, I think, my humble opinion, to be counting screen minutes. You know, I think, like I was saying earlier, screen time, well, there's definite, and I'm definitely one of those to really advocate against screen time when you can have the connection. But reading a book with your parent sitting next to you on the screen is not the same as, again, watching a Powerpuff video, which has constant rapid image changes, etc. And the impact on the brain is very different. Mr. Rogers is very different than, you know, one of the more excessive videos that you see now. And research has shown that there is no lapse in attentional spans, etc. when you're watching certain shows over others.
Yeah.
But I do think for us in the early years, synchronous online instruction is most beneficial. That's when children are engaged. It's video chatting, it's FaceTiming with a friend, it's allowing kids to maintain that steady connection that brings them in. And that's how they can learn, you know, and I think that you can do that. We're learning how. We have a bunch of our 3-year-olds now figured out how to press the mute button, you know, and allow for a Zoom circle time to occur. And it's a transition, it's a steep learning curve, but it's happening and they're engaged, and we're doing circle songs, inviting the children. And I always say the content you look for is pretty much on screen is what you would look for in a good preschool teacher.
Yes.
Someone that's warm, inviting, engaging, slow paced, repeats things several times, etc. So there's a great resource for parents. It's called Common Sense Media, and it goes through the different shows, etc., and rates it so you can look at what's appropriate, what's not, that might help. But I do believe in this sort of synchronous interaction now that we can't have the direct interaction with our friends.
It's funny you say that. One of my friends I was collaborating with on another project, we were saying that we feel like we're on this show called Romper Room, that I know this is aging me and this is dating me in the sense that, you know, anyone who grew up in the early 70s, late 60s, Romper Room was your preschool. And sometimes it feels like that. And that was on screen and it was fine. And it was interactive. But some questions are coming in right now that I wanted to pose. First question is, where did we as a society come to believe that learning could only happen in the classroom through ABCs, and attendance, etc.? That's one question. Should I pose it that way and then have any of you jump in, and then I'll pose the second one.
Anna, you want to take that? I'll let you take that one.
Can you repeat it? That the audio got cut off, Savannah.
Oh, sure. It says, where did we as a society come to believe that learning could only happen in the classroom through, you know, traditional learning experiences?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I'll have you address that, and Dr. Papazian, and I'll give you my take on that too.
Sure. I mean, one of the single best predictors of intellectual advancement is face-to-face conversations, is the amount of face-to-face conversations kids get with their parents. Variations in IQ scores and language abilities is directly linked to academic success at ages 9 and 10 is directly linked to how much talk time kids got with their parents, 0 to 3. There's nothing, you know, that takes the place of that, in my opinion. And talk time happens organically when you're cooking. Talk time happens, math happens when you're cooking. You can I always say, take the topic that the kid is interested in and delve into that, whatever it is. It doesn't matter. And I'm not going to do a top down for young kids. If a child is interested, I'm playing with a kid now who's interested in cars and racing and Formula One. And so we're doing taxonomy based on the different, you know, Formula One race tracks. I'm learning about Monza, you know, all these different tracks and all these different cars, etc. And you can bring in, oh, that's in kilometers. How does that transition into miles? And it's, you know, so you learn about the different, whether it's math skills, lexicon, all of that through conversations you have around shared topics of interest.
Yes. And just what you had said early on about, like, I guess you were talking about like brain plasticity and, you know, magic trees of the mind and Marion Diamond and all that. The idea of interaction at every level is a precursor to all kinds of learning and success in human development. So Dr. Papazian, what about as a higher education issue?
Yeah, you know, at the university, at San Jose State and at many universities nationwide, we don't have students just in classrooms all the time. We have a whole sort of program of experiential learning, which is learning by experience, or service learning, which is where students actually work out in the community in various kinds of roles, and then they bring it back to the classroom where they really break it down and talk about it and think about what worked, how did they solve that problem, what did they learn, you know, what was the academic component of it. But it's really important, I think, for students and for all of us. We want to care about what we do. We want to feel some passion. We want to see impact, and you don't see impact by sitting in a room all day, by just learning inside a classroom.
Right.
Students at the university, just as I believe, you know, in middle and high school and elementary, they learn as much outside of the classroom as they do inside of the classroom. And so the key is, how do we integrate both kinds of learning and ensure that students have that experience across the whole continuum? The challenge, to be frank, in this current environment in which we find ourselves, is that students can't just go out into different organizations out in the community and work in the way that they were before.
Right.
But many of those institutions are also looking to do things virtual. They still are reaching out, you know, to people who, you know, who need their help, or whatever their area of business might be. And so, you know, we engage our students in that as well. So they're doing those kinds of experiential activities even now, because the thinking and the needs and the development don't stop. They actually have become more profound, because we're starting to see in this current environment, and if you think about it, it's really bringing into high relief some real challenges in our society. There's no one way to solve them. It's going to take lots of thinking. And these young people today, certainly our college students, and I'm sure students in your classrooms as well, Savannah, and below, they're thinking about the world they're going to inherit. And they're thinking about what are they seeing? How do they understand it? And how can they make a difference? And what would that look like? And so that experimental learning is critical, and is a part of the overall development of a complex, you know, fully thinking, empathetic, thoughtful, an analytic adult who can and really lead and thrive in this environment. I will say we do have a challenge. It came up in the early conversation. I think you brought it up, Savannah, about thinking about how this environment impacts students at diverse income levels,
Yes.
from diverse backgrounds. You know, some of our kids, or some of our students have access. Others don't have the same access. And we're having to think about ways to provide that support as well. But that too becomes part of the experience. But it puts a lot of pressure on us, on our institutions, to be sensitive to how this is impacting different kinds of students and different populations in different ways.
This is a great segue, actually, to the next question that's coming in from our viewers about what will the new school paradigm look like given the inequity of technological resources within our families. I think I'd like to address this first as a K through 12, since I've got the largest variance of learners. I know, for example, in my school district that serves some you know, underprivileged students, districts are going out of their way to provide Chromebooks, wireless sources, so that each home has the ability to, you know, go into a Zoom discussion or a Google Hangout, Google Classroom, etc. That said, you know, we have to be honest, this will impact students of lower socioeconomic levels at a much higher level. I mean, right now I'm speaking from my office. My kids are in their rooms. They each have their tablets. My daughter attends a high school that has a 1-to-1 iPad ratio. We're not talking about those students. We're talking about in general, and especially in California, the large proportion of students who come from underprivileged or even underrepresented minorities, et cetera. Dr. Papazian, how do the universities handle this issue? I know you were touching on it, but this is the question that came in, and I thought we can go a little deeper into that.
Yeah, it's a really important question for us. 40% of our students at San Jose State are first generation college students, and we have a real diversity of backgrounds of our students. And so we have been, it's actually playing out in universities across the country. It's playing out at Harvard, for example, or Stanford, because when students are at the university, they're in a shared environment. Now everybody's looking into everybody's homes, and they can see what those look like. And so there's an added layer of social comparison, frankly, that wasn't there before, or consciousness that wasn't there before. Hence, I love virtual backgrounds.
Yes,
because
yes,
you can, you can try to mitigate some of those disparities. But we've done things like, we've bought a lot of extra computers, and we have loaner programs, and we're providing them to students. The truth of the matter is this digital divide has been with us.
Yes.
And it's taking this crisis for us to see it, frankly, up close and say, you know what? We need to solve this as a society and as a country.
Exactly.
We need broadband everywhere. We need to support people. This is a 21st century economy. Everybody, doesn't matter what work you're going to do, you're going to need to have access to broadband. So that's a big infrastructure issue for our country, honestly. Yeah. But it was there. The divide was there. It was just hidden from us. Our College of Education, works very closely with our local school districts, for example, thinking about your arena. And so they know where the schools are, where there's the most pressure. And, the faculty and the students in education are really reaching out to try to provide that support, to help teachers learn how to teach in an environment when they perhaps haven't had that experience. It's a learning process, and we have to be mindful of that. But I hope that, and again, maybe it's the optimist in me, but I really hope that if we take this seriously and we do it right, and we remain committed to our belief that no child, frankly, should not be able to succeed, that we should, we don't want to lose any child, we don't want to lose any student. We want to find a way to support them, that if we do it right, we will set them up for success and perhaps even for options on the other side of this that might not have happened because we might have lost them anyway. Yes. Because we weren't as attentive. I mean, we are attentive, right? But I'm speaking more broadly because we didn't see it. Now you can't miss it, and it's up to us as a broader society, as teachers and caregivers and the whole thing, to really be there for these students at every level.
Absolutely. Ani, what about for early, I know that's a big can of worms for early education, the socioeconomic status and whatnot. What is your take on that with this new paradigm we're faced with?
No, I completely agree with what Dr. Papazian was saying. And I definitely think that resilience is something that doesn't discriminate. So now I think one thing that I'm really looking at is the resilience literature, and looking at what are some of the attributes that really help provide resilience in kids. We talk about letting them fail young so that they can cope with failure later on. And so different kids are experiencing different, I know it's custom, it's not a one size fits all thing. And when thinking about resilience, one of the three attributes that I was thinking about that the research keeps pointing to is resilient people really understand that bad things happen to people. Suffering is part of the human experience. Yes. They don't get into the victim mode of why me and why is this happening to me. So obviously social media like Facebook, Instagram and stuff don't necessarily help that, in that you only see glimpses of people's very happy selves and happy lives. But resilient people really understand sort of the depth of, the richness of all the emotions, happiness, sadness, etc., and that stuff happens. And teaching kids that is
absolutely. It's everything. I work with a lot of students in preparing them for their college essays and work on college applications with them. And one of the things a lot of colleges are looking for is grit. Right. And how do students overcome obstacles? And I think this has really made parents also question, perhaps it's okay to be going through this process of, in essence, grief. We're grieving for, our classrooms, our life before, all that, and not focusing too much on the negative aspect of how this is affecting kids, but also how are they going to grow? And like Dr. Papazian has been consistently saying, how is this going to get them ready for not only the university, but life beyond in a 21st century that is very unlike what we grew up in?
Right, right. And
So,
yeah, I couldn't agree. There's a great quote, and it's misattributed to Darwin, and I'm going to butcher it, but it says something along the lines of, it's not the smartest or the strongest that survive, but those that can adapt and persist in change. And I really believe that. I really believe adaptability is a very, very unique and valuable quality to have.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think that's why it's so important for all of us adults, for example. And if you have, to any of you, if you have children at different levels, it's how if we can lament this situation, and certainly there is tragedy in it for those who are personally suffering because of the virus. That's appropriate, but for the rest of it, we've got to stay, I think, positive, and there's no perfect way to respond to this. So you didn't fail, right? If something, whatever might happen, anything you're doing is good and is the right thing, and for your young people to see that you're also trying to figure it out. I actually think that's a very healthy thing. The grit really is interesting and matters. When I have lots of conversations with employers in Silicon Valley, and I can't tell you how many of them say to me, "We love hiring your students even more than the students of the that fabulous school up the road closer to Stanford," which is a great school. I mean, Stanford's an amazing place. But our students come out with resilience, with grit, with an ability to understand the importance of hard work. And they're not afraid of these sorts of things because they've been facing many of these challenges all their lives. And so as long as we can help them, continue to stay connected, I have a lot of confidence they'll emerge on the other side. And I did a big event with some folks at LinkedIn last fall. And one of the things we talked about was how we can help our students transition their academic experience into a LinkedIn profile that sets themselves up for success with employers on the other side. And this gentleman, who's actually a co-founder of LinkedIn, said they should put, and actually it was Jeff Weiner, who was the CEO, stepped down a couple of weeks after that. But Jeff said, they should put their first jobs, even if it's working at the car wash, because there's something, we all want to protect them and show that they've worked in, some place that's, that we approve of, if you will. But there's something about having to work hard and with your hands in those situations that shows grit. And there is learning in that as well. And so I think there's, look, I don't want to minimize the shock of this, the challenge people went through, the incredible resilience of everyone watching this who had to figure it out with no directions. But you did it, and you didn't fail anyone. You did it because you were there. And this is going to be, as we create it, nobody knows. There's no right answer. We're all figuring it out together. But if we're asking the right questions, and if we continue to have a belief that all of this experience, all this human experience actually matters, I do think we're going to find our path forward. And we're going to move from the shock and the loss and the challenge and the fear of the unknown in many cases. And we're going to slowly start giving some order and shape to it, where there will still be some of that, because this is going to take a while, but we will emerge on the other side, and everything, we will reflect back and say, you know what, I wouldn't have wanted to learn that lesson that way. I, for one, would have rather we figure out a different way to do it, because too many people are falling sick and are injured, or are losing their livelihoods and are finding themselves in tremendous economic stress. These are real sufferings. But we have to help our kids and our students and our families find a way out. And I will say this, and I think we're probably running out of time. At the end of the day, education is going to be the key. And it's going to be the key to recovery. And so everything you can do to continue to engage your young people, whether they're at the very young ages or looking to go to university. I always say, I've heard some say, maybe I should wait a year. And I say, well, we have a 20% unemployment rate. Where are you going to work? You can't travel and do a gap year. Where are you going to go? Engage in education. You will learn things because we're thinking every day at the university. I know we are at San Jose State, and I know others are as well. How can we ensure that our students learn important lessons through this transition that perhaps wouldn't have been learned in that way, that set them up ultimately for success? And so it's a process, it's a journey, and some journeys have bumps or surprises, but sometimes those surprises and those challenges, when you look back and you reflect, they may have made a difference that had the greatest impact in a positive way on your life, and you don't even know it yet.
Right. That is a perfect way to start wrapping up this discussion. You know, one thing I want to tell parents is, especially those parents in our communities, there is a group of individuals like ourselves who are here to support you and to help you. And, you know, whether it's for early education, kids with toddlers, you've got Dr. Shabazian. For individuals who have questions about the universities, we've got Dr. Papazian. And for anyone in between, you have me and many others like me who are there to help you with whatever questions you may have. Don't worry too much about doing the job of a teacher. In essence, remember what Dr. Shabazian said. It's all about how we engage and communicate with our children, in essence. And that's the key to, you know, social and emotional support that I think all levels of learners need. And so that said, I'm going to hand it off to Rachel. Thank you for giving us this opportunity.
Oh, thank you all so much. I apologize again for technical difficulties in the beginning, as we all learn, but it did ultimately work. I think we had a few comments on challenges with audio and video with the streaming, but I'm pretty sure based on this Zoom recording, everything came through fine. So I'll be very happy to share this discussion, hopefully by tomorrow morning. The latest with everyone, and we can go through it again. And then thank you so much for your time. I think we have lots more to talk about, so I look forward to it again. And thank you for your leadership and for being there for us, all of us. So
we're all in this together.
We're all in this together. And thank you, Lalit. Oh my goodness! One last thank you to Lalit Yanakian for being a last-minute savior on our challenges with going live. So.
Yay!
Thank you.
Hang in there, everybody.
Be well. Be well. Thank you.
Well, be healthy.